The laws that I'll be chatting about today apply where a local authority is responsible for a child's education. So that includes any child in Scotland that's receiving their early learning and childcare funding. So that's normally from the age of 3, but sometimes it can include from the age of 2. It includes any child that goes to a local authority funded school, the primary or high school, and it can also include any situation where the local authority, your kind of city council, fund a place for a child at an independent special school, for example. So those are all the scenarios where this applies. If you've signed in and are listening to us today and that doesn't apply to your child, so for example, if you paid them to go to an independent school, or if you're home educating your child, then the laws would be different in that situation and your children's rights would be different. So please have a wee look at our website. Mohit will share some stuff in the chat as well, but we've got some fact sheets specifically on your children's rights if you're home educating them or if they go to an independent school, and you can have a wee look at those. But hopefully we don't lose too many of you, and most of you think that today is relevant for you. Next slide, please, Mohit. So I've already mentioned it quite a few times and I've been a bit guilty of talking about something without first explaining what I'm actually talking about. So in terms of additional support for learning, the law gives it a really, really broad definition. So it says a child has additional support needs where, for whatever reason, they can benefit from school education without extra or different help to their peers. So notably, it doesn't say in the law anywhere that your child needs a diagnosis to be recognised as having additional support needs. It's really just saying if they need extra or different help compared to what's normally offered to children the same age as them locally, then they have additional needs. Additional needs can be short term, they can be long term, they can change over time, they can often overlap. And one child might have multiple things that are affecting their ability to benefit from their learning. So all of that can be included, and the law is really broad with that. And it's been done on purpose. It's intentional that there's not a requirement for there to be a diagnosis. Next slide, please. So these are just some examples of the reasons why your child might need support. There is no one definitive list or exhaustive list of all the reasons why a child might need support. As I mentioned before, many of these you wouldn't ever appropriately have a diagnosis or wouldn't need one. But importantly, even if it's something that your child could plausibly have a diagnosis for, they don't need one to start accessing support if they need it. So that's really important, I think, where there's uncertainty maybe around what things might be going on for your child, if it's unclear professionally what's going on, if there's long waiting lists. So we hear from families every day around AMS waiting lists, for example. We know it's a really difficult position for families when things are maybe tough at school. They agree and their child's referred to get their needs assessed by CAMS, and then they're on a 2 to 3 year waiting list. And it's a big thing of saying, well, what do we do? Like, we need help now. Hopefully, it's a really clear message that I'm sure Donna and myself will repeat throughout this evening, but they do not need to wait. They should be supporting your child now if your child needs the help, regardless of whether the diagnosis is there or not. As I mentioned as well, it's also important to remember that these can all overlap and change over time. So a dyslexic child might need support with their literacy throughout their whole education, but that might be fairly set and stable, but then they might experience a bereavement and for a period need some emotional support around that too. They could fall over and break a leg and need to use a wheelchair for a period, and suddenly some of their classrooms aren't accessible and need adjustments to make sure they can access the full curriculum. Things can adapt and change over time, and the law allows for that and takes all of that into account. Next slide, please. Go ahead. So the law puts the responsibility onto the local authority. It says ultimately it's the education department in the local authority that must make sure children with support needs get the help that they need at school. It would make my job a lot easier if it says, like, this is what every child's support should look like exactly, but it obviously can't do that. Every child's different, every situation is different. So instead, it talks more broadly, and it says that they must provide adequate and efficient support to children, and that support should be based on their individual needs. So it's about taking steps to identify what children's individual needs are, what things are affecting their learning, planning and putting in place supports targeted at those needs, and then keeping things under review. So if their needs are changing, their support is changing to reflect that. So that's kind of legally, it lies with the local authority responsible, but on a day-to-day, it would normally be the school that are providing and arranging support because they're the ones that are going to be seeing your child day-to-day. Thanks, Bonet. Next slide, please. So, what do we mean by identifying your child's needs? Your local authority must provide support, like I mentioned, based on your child's needs. So the first step really is taking steps to try and understand your child and what things are affecting their learning. And that's one of the things that is often not well understood, I would say, is people think of like, oh, I need my child to have this set assessment or this set diagnosis that's got a very clear endpoint that says, okay, your child has this condition or this support need, and that's like a clear answer. And it often isn't the case like that. Like, it can often be an ongoing process of listening to you and your child and concerns if things are coming up, if you're seeing your child coming home from school and they're starting to feel really sad or negatively about school, or they're starting to have a meltdown or feeling distressed or challenging behaviours that maybe indicate that something's not quite right at school or the school's having a big impact on them. It could be observing how they're getting on in class and seeing actually, oh, they're doing amazing in this area, but they seem to be struggling a little bit more with this, and maybe there's a reason why we need to kind of have a bit of a chat or keep an eye and see why that might be a bit more tricky for them. It's to be that kind of ongoing learning process and keeping an eye on things, keeping it under regular review. But of course, there is sometimes a time and a place where a more formal assessment might be needed. For example, if between you and your child and the school, everyone's a little bit unsure or unclear on what things are affecting their learning or how best to help them, then an assessment can be really helpful for that. And there can be lots of potential people that might be involved depending on what the concerns are or what things you're wanting to be assessed. So that's a conversation that you can have with your child's school around if they're unsure, like what are the things that they may be struggling with and who might be best to ask for their involvement with. Could it be speech and language? Could it be educational psychology? Could it be CAMS? Like, is there a specific thing that everyone maybe thinks needs a little bit of investigation or looking into, or is it something a little bit broader where you're just saying, well, we can see that they're finding this part of their learning or experience at school difficult and we're not sure why. If you're having that kind of conversation with your child's school, then they can, with your permission, take that forward, put in referrals to other services and stuff. Or if the school aren't looking to take that forward, you also have the right as a parent or a carer to formally ask for your child's needs to be assessed. And that's done by writing to the local authority, additional support for learning contact. We've got all of their contact details available on our website. And I know later on Donna's going to talk as well about other routes to get assessments and diagnosis, because it's not always just needs to be through the school. There could be different ways that are more appropriate in different circumstances, but it's one of the options that's sometimes there and available. Next slide, please. So that was kind of step one before, is trying to understand what things are going on for your child, what things are affecting their learning. The second part then is actually planning on how to try and then help them with those things and put that right support in place. And I think the next few slides are over to you, Donna.
Great, thank you, Mark. So if you can just move that on to the next slide. For anyone that doesn't know about Contact, we are a charity for families with disabled children. If you move it on one slide more, that'd be great. We support families with the best possible guidance and information that we can. We bring families together to support each other and do that in a number of ways. And we help families to campaign and volunteer, and also fundraise to improve life for themselves and for other families as well. So moving on to the next slide. As I said, we provide advice and information, support to families of all disabled children and young people aged from birth right up to 25. And that includes long-term conditions, rare conditions, physical and learning disabilities, sensory challenges, behaviour that challenges, including communication, life-limiting conditions, along with mental health issues. So I'll pass you back to Mark for the next part of that.
Thank you. So the aims for this evening are really to share with you a bit of an overview on what the law says about children's rights to get support at school, specifically without having a diagnosis. And from Contact as well, we're going to learn hopefully lots more around the challenges that can be faced when trying to get a diagnosis, what you can do if you're facing that for your child, who can help, and things to think about when kind of going through that process. We know it can be a bit of a lengthy one, it can be a tricky time, so hopefully by the end of this evening you'll feel a little bit more confident with all of that. And to help us figure that out and see if we're helping you feel a bit more confident, we've got on the next slide, we've got a quick poll, if that's okay. So we're going to ask the same question of you now at the beginning before we kind of hand the full chat, and then we'll ask you the same question at the end. And it's, how confident do you feel in your understanding of your child's rights to support at school? The poll answers are anonymous, so please do answer them honestly and just say how you feel about them. And then, like I said, we'll ask the same question again later on, which means we'll get a bit of a gauge for whether hopefully you're feeling a little bit more confident after hearing from us. I'll see if we can share the poll now. And see some of them coming in. I think we might have shared the end of webinar poll, but it's absolutely fine because we'll just share the start of webinar poll later. That's good. You can see people answer it. It's also not mandatory. You don't need to answer if you don't particularly want to. That's fab. Thank you so much to all those that answered. So it looks like at the moment the majority are feeling not at all confident or not very confident. I think that's taken 65–67% roughly at the moment. A few people are feeling confident, which is great to hear, and hopefully we can bump you up to very confident by the end. And a few people are very confident, so that's always great to hear too. Thank you so much for that. So let's dive in then. Mohit, if it's okay to go to the next slide, please, that we found. Grand. So we're here today, obviously, to talk about children's rights, and it's worth first mentioning that they come from lots of different places and from lots of different levels. So they kind of start and stem really from international human rights laws, and we've obviously all had in the news fairly recently the Scotland's incorporation of the United Nations Charter on the Rights of the Child, the UNCRC, which is fantastic. There's also human rights laws, other human rights conventions. There's the Equality Act that's UK-wide and not just applying to Scotland. And then kind of coming down all the levels, there's the Additional Support for Learning Act, which is the main law that applies to Scotland that affects children's rights to get support at school. So it can come from lots of kind of different levels, but tonight's focus really, we're going to look specifically at the additional support for learning laws and what they mean in terms of getting the right help at school.